Germán Vadillo, the nation's first Puerto Rican-born U.S. congressman, came to the U.S. when he was 12 years old and went to New York City public school as an English learning student, back when there were no bilingual programs.
I found that even though I could not speak English, what they were studying, I had learned in Puerto Rico a couple of years ago. But the kids who had not gone to good schools in Puerto Rico could not keep up trying to both learn the language and maintain course content, and they dropped out.
Because of this experience, Germán Vadillo felt the need for a program that helped struggling English learning students. In his role as an U.S. congressman, he drafted the first Spanish-English bilingual education legislation.
That's why when I went to Congress, I pushed to get on the Committee on Education, which enabled me to push in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1974 to get a real title that defined bilingual education.
Although he still supports the system, the man who became one of the first champions of bilingual education believes it can actually hurt students when it goes on for too long.
We do need to readjust bilingual education so it does not go on for 6 or 8 years, which is happening now, because otherwise the kids never go into the mainstream.
In fact, he is against English immersion programs that are being promoted now and believes they are in violation of federal law.
I believe that if you were to bring a Supreme Court case challenging ESL as really being a violation of Lau against Nichols, that case would be successful. If it's not challenged, the whole concept of bilingual education is going to be eliminated more and more and more.
According to Vadillo, the best way for the Department of Education to deal with this issue should be to implement higher and equal standards.
The reason I called my book One Nation, One Standard is because I believe that we should have one educational standard for all children. We have a double standard now. We get the white kids who get a good curriculum and a good education. Black and Latino kids get an inferior education because of things like social promotion. They're promoted even if they're not learning.
But as the fight continues, Germán Vadillo believes that in order to achieve a good education, the Latino community not only needs a school system reform, but also more parental involvement.
The Asian community is able to do quite well. They come here as we do, poor, who can't speak the language, and who are discriminated against. And yet, the Asian community does extraordinarily well within the same school system. Why? Because the parents place a much greater value in education, which is what our parents should be doing as well.
Ron Blackburn, Germán Vadillo has evolved in his view of bilingual ed. Has Aspira?
Well, fundamentally, no, we haven't. We still sustain that if you have a well-implemented, well-thought-through bilingual education program, you do 3 things. You're able to let the student learn English, which is critically important. Second, to learn content at the same time. It would be extremely difficult for me to take a chemistry course in German. And the third is language retention, which is what we were talking about just a minute ago. This third piece is very, very important. English immersion has shown, in many cases, to be effective. In most cases, not. And I think that bilingual education, when I say bilingual education, well-implemented bilingual education programs, I mean you have to have a program that's integrated into the reform in the school. It's not isolated, which has its tend to be. You have to have the resources, including the teachers and the support resources. And finally, the will. And I think that No Child Left Behind is providing a sense that in schools that they have to provide for these students. And they're looking for answers to these questions for the first time. So the transition is important, obviously, and I don't believe that students should remain in bilingual education for 7 or 8 years. The consent decree calls for a 3-year period. But the fundamental issue of language acquisition, content learning, And retention of native language is still fundamentally the same as it was in the 70s.
Don Soifer, you heard the former congressman talk about taking too long to transition. And some of the people on our panel have been talking about bilingual ed in an idealistic and best practices way. What do we know about what real kids do in America? Do they spend a long time transitioning? Do they spend too long transitioning?
Well, we heard Congressman Badillo talk about 6 to 8 years, and Aspera talks about 3 years. The reality in California is that less than 10% of English learners transition to English proficiency in any given year, so we're talking about an average more than 10 years. Now, the change that's happened in California doesn't look, you walk into a classroom in California, it doesn't look like what you would expect if you were to read Proposition 227, but it has started a dialogue, a real meaningful dialogue, in every school district that I've looked at, of how to really improve results so the kids are not just learning English, but how the kids are just learning, period. And questions like coping with linguistic isolation have become part of the mainstream education dialogue in California. And although the results have a long way to go, the individual results for each kid matters. Prior to 2001, many states didn't even have a uniform definition of what an English learner was, which made data impossible to gather or measure. I think we've made strides not just since Congressman Badillo's results, but even since 2001, and we're moving in the right direction, but we have a long way to go.
Well, just a few moments ago, you heard Ron say that English immersion doesn't work. What do you say?
Well, we're seeing the evolution of good, new, structured programs where kids are taught in the structured English immersion program. They're taught initially in English, but with constant support from teachers in their native language, in strategies that are focused on providing early English proficiency and before a kid falls behind. And those programs are starting to work in ways that some of the programs that we discussed at the beginning of the show never did.